The question that finally broke something in me sounded almost casual. My mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her fist on the table. She just smirked, set her wineglass down with this soft little click, looked straight at me, and said, "Why are you even here?" For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The room was full of small sounds. The clink of silverware against ceramic, the low hum of the refrigerator, the nervous little laugh my sister-in-law let out before she realized no one else was laughing. The overhead light buzzed faintly, turning everything this sickly, yellow-white that made the roast chicken in the middle of the table look waxy and fake. We were sitting at the same dining table I'd grown up around. The same dark wood, the same faint ring where my brother had spilled grape juice at 8 and never been blamed for. The chairs still creaked in the same places. Even the floral tablecloth was familiar, now a little more faded, a little more stained, but carefully ironed like tonight was some sort of occasion. And in a way, it was. My parents had sent a group text 2 weeks earlier. Family dinner, very important, we'd like everyone there. No emojis, no extra words, just that. My mom had followed up with, "We have some news to share," and a thumbs up. It was the most formal she'd sounded with me in years, which should have been my first warning. Still, I said yes. Or more honestly, I said yes because my wife, Sarah, squeezed my hand and said, "If it feels off, we'll leave. You won't have to do it alone." That's the only reason I was sitting there that night, legs jammed into the same too tight space between chair and table, pretending this was just another awkward family gathering. Across from me, my brother Ethan was in his usual spot, the seat my mother always called his, even when we were kids, like the chair had a name on it I couldn't see. He had one arm slung over the backrest, his posture loose and relaxed, like this was his living room and we were merely guests. His plate was already piled high. My father sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed a little too intently on his food, shoulders hunched in that familiar way that meant he wished he could disappear into the chair. Sarah was on my right, close enough that her knee kept brushing mine every time she shifted. She'd been quiet the whole meal, letting the forced small talk swirl around her. She laughed politely when my mother told some story about Ethan's promotion. She thanked my father for passing the potatoes. She even complimented the seasoning on the chicken, which I knew tasted like nothing. My mother had barely looked at me all evening. When she did, it was to correct something minor, how I held my fork, where I set my glass, or to loop me back into a conversation about Ethan. "Do you remember when your brother won that big game?" she'd asked at one point, as if my only value was being a witness to his greatness. I'd learned a long time ago how to float through these dinners half present, half somewhere else in my head. This time, I kept my focus on the little things. The way the candle wax had dripped down the brass holder, forming layers like tree rings. The pale scratch on the table where I'd carved my initials as a teenager and gotten grounded for ruining nice things. The faint smell of my mom's perfume mixed with dish soap and roasted garlic. So when she asked it, "Why are you even here?" it sliced through all the noise. The words hung there for a second, almost visible in the air between us. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I watched a piece of carrot slide off and land back on the plate with a soft tap. My heart started doing that heavy, uneven pounding that makes your ears ring. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was joking, if this was some twisted attempt at humor I'd somehow missed. But her face told me everything. That smirk wasn't playful. It was satisfied. Her eyes were bright, almost eager, like she'd been waiting all night to say this out loud. Ethan's lips twitched into a half smile he tried to hide behind his glass. My father shifted, cleared his throat, and looked down at his potatoes like they might offer him an escape route. Nobody rushed to soften it. Nobody said, "Mom, that's not fair," or "What do you mean by that?" The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. It told me this wasn't out of character. This was just the part they usually dressed up better. I felt myself shrinking, that familiar instinct kicking in. Make yourself smaller, make yourself quieter, apologize for existing until they calm down. My mouth opened automatically, ready to say something like, "We can go if it's a problem," even though we'd driven an hour to get there. My tongue felt thick. The back of my neck was hot. It was like being 8 years old again and getting in trouble for sitting on the wrong chair. But before I could get the words out, the chair to my right scraped back against the hardwood floor. It was a sharp, clean sound that cut straight through the tension. Sarah pushed her chair away from the table with deliberate slowness and stood up. She didn't slam her hands down or raise her voice. She just rose, smoothing the front of her shirt, and looked at my mother with a calm I didn't feel. I watched my mom's expression flicker, Annoyance, confusion, something close to surprise. Ethan's eyebrows went up. My father finally lifted his gaze, like it had just occurred to him that someone else at the table might have thoughts about what had been said. My pulse, which had been roaring in my ears, shifted into a different rhythm. I realized in that moment that Sarah had been waiting too, not to ambush, not to perform, but to see exactly how far my family would go if no one stopped them. She drew in a breath, slow and steady, like she'd rehearsed this 100 times in her head. Her hand brushed my shoulder lightly as she steadied herself, a touch so small it might have looked accidental to anyone else, but it anchored me. I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen directed fully at my parents before. Not nervous deference, not forced politeness, but a kind of clear, focused resolve. She knew something they didn't. Sitting there, with my mother's questions still echoing around the room and Sarah about to answer it in a way none of us could take back, I realized this night wasn't just another painful dinner. It was a line being drawn. And to understand why that question didn't destroy me this time, you need to know how we got here. If you walked into our house when I was a kid, you'd know within 5 seconds who it really belonged to. The first thing you saw wasn't family photos or a cozy entryway. It was a shrine to my older brother, Ethan. His sports trophies lined the hallway like a golden breadcrumb trail leading from the front door to his bedroom. Gleaming plastic athletes frozen mid-swing, mid-kick, mid-victory. Little brass plates announced his name, his team, his achievements. The shelves were dusted regularly. My mother wiped each trophy down with the same care some people reserve for heirlooms. If I had anything on display, it never lasted long. I loved to draw when I was little. I'd spend hours hunched over the kitchen table with crayons and printer paper, trying to copy the cartoons from Saturday mornings. Every once in a while, my mom would pin one of my drawings on the fridge with a magnet. It was usually when guests were coming over, and she needed the house to look family-oriented. I'd walk past the fridge, see my crooked superhero or lopsided tree, and feel my chest swell. Then, a day or two later, it would be gone. No ceremony, no explanation. Just quietly replaced by Ethan's A+ spelling test or a flyer for his next game. If I asked where my picture went, my mom would say, "Oh, it got smudged, honey. We'll put up the next one." The next one never quite made it, though. Eventually, I stopped asking. Relatives noticed Ethan too, but not me. When my grandparents or aunts and uncles came over, they'd step through the door and immediately say, "Where's our star?" Or "How's my favorite nephew?" meaning Ethan. I'd be standing right there, shoes half on, and they'd brush past me with a quick, distracted, "Hey, kiddo," before zeroing in on him. He'd emerge from his room to applause levels of enthusiasm, and I'd trail behind, learning to position myself just out of the way so I wouldn't be yelled at for hovering. Birthdays made the hierarchy impossible to ignore. Ethan's birthdays were events. My mom would start planning weeks in advance. Themed decorations, a custom cake from the good bakery across town, rented bounce houses or trips to the bowling alley. The house would fill with his friends, glittering wrapping paper, and the smell of pizza. There were always balloons tied to the mailbox, like the world needed help finding where the celebration was. Mine were efficient. If my birthday fell anywhere within a manageable distance of Ethan's, my parents would sigh and say, "Let's just do a combined party. It makes more sense." That way, we saved money, and everyone could be together. In reality, it meant my name got added in smaller letters under his on the cake, and the decorations matched his interests, not mine. I remember one year in particular. He wanted a soccer theme. I was into dinosaurs. We had soccer plates, soccer napkins, a soccer ball piñata. My mom poked a single plastic T-Rex into the corner of the cake and said, "See? Now it's yours too." The gifts followed the same pattern. I'd unwrap a pack of markers or a board game for both of you. Then Ethan would tear into a new jersey with his name on it, cleats, and a shiny new ball, because he really needs it for the team. Everyone oohed and awed while I tried to be happy for him, clutching my generic presents and telling myself I shouldn't be jealous. Christmas wasn't much different. One year stands out, burned into my memory like a bad photograph. I must have been around 12, Ethan 14. Money was tight, according to my parents. They said it constantly that year, like a mantra. We shouldn't expect much. We should be grateful for whatever we got. On Christmas morning, we sat by the tree in our mismatched pajamas, the living room smelling like pine needles and coffee. My main gift was a black winter jacket, still with the clearance tag half torn off. My mom made a point of saying, "We got a great deal on that. 70% off. Aren't we smart?" I smiled and said thank you, because that's what you're supposed to do. The jacket was fine. Plain, functional, nothing special. Then Ethan opened his. A brand new gaming console, the exact one he'd been begging for. My dad had driven to another state to find it, apparently, because they had sold out everywhere. Ethan actually yelled with joy. My parents laughed, clapped, hugged him like he'd just achieved something incredible by existing. I sat there holding my bargain bin jacket, the price tag scratching my wrist, watching the reflection of the TV in its smooth black surface. My mother caught my eye and said, almost accusingly, "You needed a jacket, remember? You should be grateful we could afford it." That was the quiet rule of our house. Ethan's wants were needs, my needs were complaints. My mother was a master of performative warmth. In public, she was the doting, supportive parent. At school events, she'd wrap an arm around my shoulders, smile for pictures, and say things like, "We're so proud of both our boys." Teachers loved her. Other parents envied her. At Ethan's games, she was the loudest cheerleader in the stands, but she'd nudge me and say, "Go on, at least pretend you're excited for your brother. Don't be so moody." Behind closed doors, her smile thinned. Compliments disappeared. I heard a different set of phrases on repeat. "You're just so sensitive. Why can't you be more like Ethan? Do you have to take everything so personally?" If I cried, I was dramatic. If I was quiet, I was sulking. If I tried to explain how I felt, I was accused of starting something. She had a way of turning any conversation into a referendum on my flaws. I learned to do emotional calculus before I spoke. Was it worth mentioning that my teacher liked my artwork if it meant being told not to brag? When Ethan wasn't there? My father floated somewhere in the background, a ghost with a pulse. He worked long hours and liked to remind us of that fact. When he was home, he was either in front of the TV, zoned out, or in the garage pretending to fix things that didn't seem broken. If my mother snapped at me and I looked to him for help, he'd suddenly become very interested in his plate, the newspaper, the game. "Don't drag me into this," he'd mutter if I got too close. His silence spoke louder than any lecture. He didn't have to tell me whose side he was on. His absence did it for him. By the time I was 9 or 10, I had a PhD-level understanding of how to take up as little space as possible. I got used to being the extra chair filled, extra plate set, extra kid in photos where the real subject was my brother. My job was to clap, to nod, to not make trouble. On good days, I could almost convince myself that was enough. One night at dinner, though, the illusion cracked. We were eating spaghetti at that same dining table, the sauce thick and slightly burnt the way my mother always made it. There was a basket of garlic bread in the middle. Ethan had already shoveled 2 pieces onto his plate without asking. My father was halfway through his second helping. I'd finished mine quickly. I was still growing, always hungry back then. I reached toward the basket and said, "Can I have another piece?" My mother's fork stopped midair. She looked at my plate, then at me, eyes narrowing like she'd caught me stealing. "Don't be greedy," she snapped. "You don't need seconds. You're getting chubby. Leave some for other people for once." Heat flared up my neck. I mumbled, "Okay," and pulled my hand back, cheeks burning, staring at the one cold piece left in the basket like it was something shameful. A few minutes later, Ethan leaned over, grabbed that last piece without asking, and stuffed half of it into his mouth in one bite. My mother laughed. "Boys and their appetites," she said fondly, reaching over to ruffle his hair. No one mentioned his thirds. No one called him greedy. The only difference between us in that moment was our place in the invisible ranking my parents had been enforcing my whole life. That was the first time I realized the rules were different for me. But it wouldn't be the last. By the time I hit my teens, the roles in our house weren't just patterns anymore. They were job titles. Ethan was still the star, of course. I was something closer to the designated problem. If anything went wrong, the default answer was my name. "Who left the door unlocked?" My mother would shout from the hallway. "It must have been you," she'd say before I could even answer, even if I'd been the last one home and knew she'd followed me in. If there was a dirty dish left in the sink, it was mine, even when I could point to the plate of half-eaten pizza rolls Ethan had abandoned. If the Wi-Fi cut out, somehow I'd been messing with something. Once, when my father misplaced his car keys, he stormed into my room and accused me of borrowing the car in the middle of the night. I didn't even have my learner's permit yet. Ethan, on the other hand, was coated in Teflon. Trouble just didn't stick to him. If he came home late and reeking of beer, my mother sighed, "Boys will be boys," and reminded him to be more careful next time. When he got a speeding ticket, my father grumbled about those cops having nothing better to do, and quietly paid it off. At school, the differences expanded. Ethan played varsity sports, of course. Every time he needed new cleats, new gear, new travel money, my parents opened their wallets without hesitation. If his team had an out-of-town tournament, the hotel fees and gas were covered, no discussion. My mother would brag to anyone within earshot about how much they sacrificed for Ethan's dreams, like it was some noble hardship. I wasn't into sports. I liked the debate team, art club, the school paper. None of those came with booster moms or proud dads and bleachers, so the expenses were suddenly my problem. When I asked about the participation fee for debate, my mother waved me off. We can't afford every little thing you want to do. Be reasonable. Besides, it's not like colleges care about that stuff the way they do sports. So I got a part-time job. At 15, I started working afternoons and weekends at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and rounding up stray carts in the parking lot. The work wasn't glamorous, and my feet ached by the end of every shift, but the paycheck meant I could pay the club fees myself, buy my own sketchbooks, go on the occasional school trip. My managers liked me. I showed up on time, stayed late if someone was sick, said please and thank you to the grumpiest customers. The first time I brought home my earnings in crisp bills, I remember feeling something electric, a sense of having my own small corner of control. I tucked the money into a shoebox in my closet, counting and recounting it, planning out how I'd spend each dollar. It didn't last. One evening, my mother knocked on my door without waiting for an answer and walked in, already wringing her hands. "We need to talk," she said, in that ominous tone that meant she'd already decided what the outcome would be. She sat on the edge of my bed and sighed. "We're in a bit of a bind, honey. The electric bill is higher than we thought, and your father's hours were cut this week. We just need to borrow a little from your savings. Just for now. We'll pay you back when things are better." It took me a second to process that she even knew about the shoebox. Then I realized, of course she did. Nothing in that house truly belonged to me. My room was just a space I occupied under their terms. I hesitated, clutching my math homework like it could shield me. "How much?" I asked. "Don't start," she snapped lightly, then softened her voice. "You're so fortunate to have a job at your age. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Do you really want to see the lights shut off?" I handed over the money. It became a pattern. Every time the shoebox refilled past a certain point, some emergency would materialize. A surprise car repair. A medical bill. Once it was a school fundraiser for Ethan's team, something about matching donations being due that week. Each time, my mother promised to pay me back when things are better. Things, apparently, were always on the verge of getting better, but never quite did. Meanwhile, tight finances didn't seem to stop certain purchases. Ethan showed up one afternoon with a brand new, top-of-the-line pair of sneakers. Another month, he was suddenly going on a weekend ski trip with friends, lift tickets and rentals covered. My mother shrugged when I asked how. "We found a way," she said. "We always find a way for important things." I started to realize that in our house, important was just another word for anything that benefits Ethan. Any attempt I made to push back, even gently, was treated like betrayal. If I stayed late at the library to finish a project, my phone would light up with texts. "Why aren't you home yet? You know we eat at 6. Do you enjoy worrying your mother?" When I walked in the door, she'd be waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, face pinched. "You could have done that work here," she'd say. "I needed the quiet," I'd answer. "And what? This house isn't good enough for you?" Her voice would sharpen on that last word. "You," like it contained every disrespect I'd ever shown. If I pointed out that Ethan missed dinners all the time for practice, she'd gasp, offended. "That's different. He has commitments. He's part of a team. You're just avoiding us." The message was clear. His time was valuable, mine was selfish. My father stayed out of it as usual. If the argument got loud enough, he'd raise the TV volume. On rare occasions when I appealed to him directly, "Dad, can you tell her it's okay if I stay late sometimes?" He'd sigh and say, "You know how your mother gets. Just keep the peace, will you? It's not worth the hassle." To him, I was always asking for too much, even when all I wanted was to not be constantly blamed, borrowed from, or guilt-tripped. By the time I was a senior in high school, I'd learned to preempt the explosions. I gave up on certain things before I even asked. I stopped telling them about opportunities that required money or rides. I learned to be grateful for crumbs. A mild word instead of a sharp one. A ride to school when it was raining, a dinner where my name wasn't used as a punchline. Graduation was supposed to be one of the big days, the kind of milestone families circle on calendars and plan around. Mine treated it like an errand squeezed in between more important events. Ethan had summer practice that day, some optional scrimmage his coach called, and my mother spent the entire week before fretting about his schedule. "We'll have to leave right after the ceremony," she reminded me repeatedly. "Ethan can't be late. You understand, right? This is important for his future." I nodded, because what else was I going to do? The ceremony itself was a blur of heat and names being read over a muffled sound system. My classmates were taking selfies, hugging their parents, waving their diplomas in the air. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, shook the principal's hand, and scanned the bleachers. I spotted my parents halfway up, my mother already glancing at her watch, my father scrolling through his phone. Afterward, they met me by the fence, the concrete radiating warmth through the soles of my shoes. My mom pulled me into a quick side hug, more of a pat really, and said, "We're proud of you too," as if she were adding a footnote to a sentence I hadn't heard. Then she checked the time. "We really need to go," she said. "Ethan's going to be late. We'll celebrate properly later, okay?" They left in a rush of car doors and exhaust fumes, Ethan shouting "Congrats, man," over his shoulder like a line he'd been fed. I stood there in my cap and gown, clutching the empty diploma folder they'd given us before the real thing arrived in the mail, watching my family drive away from my own graduation. I was about to start the walk home when I heard my name. It was my English teacher, Ms. Reyes, waving me over. She had this kind, tired smile and a set of keys jangling in her hand. "Hey," she said, looking past me, scanning the parking lot. "Your folks already take off?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. Ethan had practice. She paused, eyes softening in a way that made me want to look away. "Well," she said, "I was just about to grab some ice cream to celebrate the end of the year. You want to join? My treat." We ended up at the little ice cream shop near school, me still half in my gown, drips of mint chocolate chip running down my fingers. She asked about my plans, really listened to my answers, told me she was proud of how hard I'd worked. It was maybe an hour of her life. To me, it felt like someone had finally seen me. That night, lying on my bed with my graduation cap on the dresser and the house quiet around me, I promised myself I'd build a life where I mattered. I had no idea how hard my parents would work to keep that from happening. Leaving for college felt like stepping off a treadmill I hadn't realized I'd been running on for years. The campus was only a couple of hours from home, but it might as well have been another country. No trophies with Ethan's name on them lined the dorm hallways. No one automatically deferred to someone else because they'd been crowned the family favorite. For the first time, I existed without being a supporting character in someone else's story. My roommates treated me like an equal. On the first night, we sat cross-legged on the floor, eating cheap pizza out of the box, trading dumb facts about ourselves. When I mentioned I'd been on the debate team, one of them, Chris, said, "That's awesome, man. You'll save us during presentations." No one asked what Ethan did. No one even knew he existed. It was disorienting and intoxicating all at once. Classes were the same way. Professors read my essays and circled sentences with comments like, "Strong insight," and "You have a real voice here." In a freshman seminar, my professor pulled me aside after class and said, "Have you thought about applying for the honors program? I think you'd thrive." I remember blinking at him, genuinely unsure if he was talking to the right student. I wasn't used to adults looking at me and seeing potential instead of problems. I leaned into it. I sat in the front row. I went to office hours. I joined study groups and campus organizations. Every time someone took me at face value, as smart, capable, basically decent, it felt like I was trying on a version of myself that had been waiting in the back of my mental closet, tags still on. It was a campus counselor who gave me the language for what I'd grown up with. Our university offered a certain number of free therapy sessions each semester. I'd signed up half on a whim, half because the idea of talking to someone who wasn't already tangled in my family mess sounded like a relief. In that small, softly lit office with its mismatched pillows and overwatered plant, I started talking. At first I framed everything like it was normal. The way Ethan was the golden boy, the way my mom got a little intense sometimes, the way my dad didn't like drama. I laughed off certain stories, minimized others. My therapist, Dr. Patel, didn't. She just listened, really listened, and then gently introduced new words. Scapegoat, parentification, narcissistic family system. They clicked into place with a horrible kind of relief. It wasn't that my family was uniquely monstrous. It was that there were patterns, predictable, documented patterns, that explained why I felt crazy and invisible at the same time. "None of this is your fault," Dr. Patel said once, after I'd apologized for the third time in 10 minutes for rambling about my mother. "You learned to survive in a system that needed you to play a very specific role. That doesn't mean you have to keep playing it." That sentence stuck with me longer than anything she wrote on her clipboard. Of course, my family didn't evaporate just because I'd changed locations and learned some new vocabulary. Their grip just got more subtle, more complicated. Growing up, I'd heard about the college fund for both boys. So many times it felt like a bedtime story. "We're putting money away for you," my mom would say when she tossed Ethan a new pair of shoes. "For both of you. So you don't have to worry when the time comes." So when financial aid letters started coming in, I didn't panic about the numbers. I took out modest loans, assuming they were supplementing this mythical fund my parents had apparently been feeding for years. My mother reassured me they'd handle what they could, and that I should just focus on school. Except, almost immediately, the edges didn't line up. I was perpetually broke in a way that didn't make sense. My work-study job covered textbooks and the occasional cheap meal out, but there were months when my account balance dropped so low the ATM basically laughed at me. Meanwhile, Ethan, who'd chosen a more expensive school, seemed to be living a completely different financial reality. He posted photos from nicer apartments, weekends away, front-row concert seats. My parents would brag on the phone about how they didn't want him distracted by a job. "He needs to focus on his future," my mother said once, when I mentioned I was picking up extra shifts at the campus cafe. "You're young. You'll bounce back from a little exhaustion." There were concrete moments when the cracks turned into craters. One semester, my landlord emailed a reminder that rent was due in 3 days. My parents had promised to send part of it that month, just until I got settled. When I checked my account, nothing had landed. I called my mother. "Hey, just checking in about the money for rent. It hasn't come through yet." Her tone shifted into offended immediately. "We've been very busy, you know. Your father's been working overtime. You have no idea what we juggle for you boys." "I get that," I said carefully, staring at the payment due line in my inbox. I need to know if it's coming." "My landlord." "So that's it," she cut in. "You only call when you want money? You didn't even ask how I'm doing." Guilt flared automatically, like a conditioned reflex. "Sorry. How are you?" "Oh, don't bother now," she sighed. "I just think it's interesting that after everything we've done for you, you talk to us like we're a bank. You know, Ethan never makes us feel like this." The transfer finally hit my account the next day, short by $50. When I asked about the discrepancy, I got a one-line text. "We're not made of money. Be grateful." I screenshotted the message and then immediately deleted the image, like having evidence of it was somehow disloyal. Back then, I still thought the problem was me expecting too much, not them doing too little with what they had. It was around this time that I met Sarah. We were both in a brutal statistics class that had a reputation for tanking GPAs. One night, I showed up late to a study group in the library, flustered from a phone call with my mother that had ended in tears I'd swallowed down. Sarah was there already, notebook open, pen tapping a steady rhythm. She looked up, took in my face, and quietly slid a spare granola bar across the table without comment. We started talking between problem sets. I learned she had a dry sense of humor and a way of asking questions that made you feel like she was actually listening to the answers. One day, my phone lit up on the table with Mom across the screen. Without thinking, I flinched. "You don't have to answer," Sarah said gently, noticing. "We can keep working." I stared at the name, at the little vibrating rectangle demanding my attention. "If I don't, she'll just keep calling," I mumbled, already answering, already stepping into the familiar role. She watched the conversation play out in bits and pieces. My mother complaining that I never made time for family, asking if I could send home some money because things were tight, reminding me that Ethan was killing it and never gave them this kind of stress. By the time I hung up, my chest was tight, my hands clammy. "That didn't sound great," Sarah said carefully. "That's just how she is," I replied, shrugging, defaulting to the script. "She doesn't mean anything by it." Sarah tilted her head, studying me. "Do they always talk to you like that?" The question lodged under my skin. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say she'd caught an exception, an off day. Instead, I found myself saying, "Pretty much," and hearing how sad that sounded out loud. She didn't push, not then. But over the next weeks and months, she started gently probing the stories I told like they were drafts that could be revised. "They forgot your birthday again?" she repeated one evening, eyes widening. "And just laughed it off?" "They're busy," I said automatically. "Ethan had a big game that week." "I get being busy," she said. "But you're not optional." I didn't know how to explain that. In my family, I kind of was. Little by little, she held up a mirror to the things I considered normal. When I talked about sending money home from my campus job because my mother hinted they could really use it, she frowned. "Wait, aren't they also helping Ethan with his rent?" she asked. When I nodded, she followed up with, "So why are you the one going without groceries to cover their bills?" I didn't have a good answer. Underneath the practiced justifications, "They've done so much for me. They're struggling. I don't want to be selfish." Something restless started to stir. The moment everything shifted from vague unease to a sharp awareness came in my junior year. During a weekend, I went home to save money on food. I was in the hallway, heading to the bathroom, when I heard my mother's voice drifting out of the kitchen, bright and excited. "And the cruise is booked," she was saying. 7 days, balcony rooms, all inclusive. "It's going to be amazing. You and Jenna are going to love it." Ethan laughed on the other end of the line, his voice muffled but clear enough. "Can't believe you pulled this off, Mom. You're the best. Anything for my favorite people," she cooed. "We deserve this after everything. And don't worry, we'll cover most of it. You two just bring spending money." I stood there, barefoot on the cold tile, heart thudding. A cruise. For the whole family, apparently. No one had mentioned it to me. No group text. No call about tight finances in this context. Just a secret trip, planned and paid for like I didn't exist. My mother's laughter floated down the hall, sugary sweet. "It'll be so nice to have everyone together," she said. Everyone. I looked at the trophies still lining the walls, the framed photos of Ethan on stages and fields. I thought about the rent money that was always late, the "we're not made of money" texts, the apologies I'd swallowed for asking where my supposed college fund had gone when I was stretching ramen packets to last the week. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just overlooked. I was being actively excluded. Graduating from college should have felt like the end of something, but with Sarah by my side, it felt more like the beginning. We found a small apartment not far from her work and my first job, a cramped one-bedroom with peeling paint and a temperamental radiator that clanged at odd hours. But it was ours. No one else's name was on the door. No one could decide which of us mattered more inside those walls. We built our routines slowly. Sunday mornings meant coffee at the chipped kitchen table and grocery lists scribbled on the backs of envelopes. Weeknights were leftovers and shared headphones, watching shows on my old laptop. It wasn't glamorous, but for the first time in my life, I lived in a space where my presence wasn't conditional. If I left the door unlocked by accident, no one accused me of trying to ruin everything. If a dish stayed in the sink overnight, we just washed it in the morning. Meeting Sarah's family only highlighted how strange my own felt. Her parents invited me over for dinner a few months into our relationship. I braced myself on the car ride there, expecting some version of what I'd grown up with. Smiles that didn't reach their eyes, questions that were really tests, a running commentary about their star child that I'd be expected to applaud. Instead, her mom greeted us at the door in an apron dusted with flour, cheeks flushed from the oven. "You must be starving," she said, pulling me into a real hug, no awkward half-lean. "Come in. I made that pasta Sarah said you liked." I blinked. "I mentioned that once," I said to Sarah later, as we helped clear the table. She shrugged, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She listens. Her dad was the same way. When I offered to help with the dishes, he didn't wave me away or act like it was some extraordinary favor. He handed me a towel, rinsed plates beside me, and said, "Thanks for pitching in. Makes it easier on everyone." Simple, straightforward appreciation. No strings attached. The first time her mother snapped a little, snarky comment about traffic while we were all stuck in the car, she caught herself a few minutes later. "Sorry," she said, turning slightly in the front seat. "I'm cranky when I drive." That wasn't fair. Then she changed the subject. I sat there stunned. In my family, apologies only came attached to a list of reasons why it was actually your fault for feeling hurt. Hearing an adult say, "That wasn't fair," and mean it felt like witnessing some rare natural phenomenon. The contrast was jarring in a way that was both comforting and painful. Comforting because it proved families like this existed. Painful because it underlined just how much I'd gone without. My own parents responded to my adult milestones with all the enthusiasm of someone checking spam emails. When I called to tell my mother I'd landed a job in my field, not glamorous but solid, she barely paused. "Well, that's good," she said. "Ethan is interviewing at a real company next week. They're very selective. We're all on pins and needles." I stared at the wall of our apartment, tracing the crack in the paint with my eyes. "Yeah," I said. "That's great for him." There was no congratulations, no "we're proud of you," just a quick pivot back to familiar territory. Ethan's next triumph, my news as an afterthought. When Sarah and I got engaged a couple of years later, her parents cried in the way you hope people cry at happy news. My mother-in-law hugged us both, already talking about color palettes and playlists. My father-in-law asked about our budget, not to judge, but to see how he could help. They offered what they could: time, money, labor, without using it as leverage. My parents' reaction was different. "We're happy for you," my mother said in a tone that suggested she'd just been told the weather report. "Weddings are expensive, though. You shouldn't expect too much from us. Things are tight." I hadn't actually asked for anything yet. I'd called to share the news, not to hand them an invoice. Still, I rushed to reassure her. "It's okay. We're keeping it small. We've got it handled." She exhaled, relieved. "Good. We can't do for you what we've done for Ethan. You know that." I wondered what exactly they'd done for him. I didn't have to wait long to get a partial answer. As we were deep in wedding planning, counting every dollar, choosing a cheaper venue on an off-season date, I opened social media one night and saw my parents' faces framed by ancient architecture and sunny plazas. They were in Europe. Not just a one-city trip, either. Multiple posts over 2 weeks, each one tagged in a different country. Fancy dinners, wine tastings, museums, and in most of the photos, Ethan and his girlfriend smiling between them. "Bucket list trip with our favorite people." My mother had captioned one picture. "We worked so hard for this." My stomach dropped. Tight finances, I thought bitterly, staring at a photo of them laughing on some cobblestone street. Sarah came up behind me, looked over my shoulder, and swore under her breath. "I thought they couldn't help with the wedding," she said quietly. "They can't," I replied automatically, parroting the line I'd been fed. "They're just managing priorities." She didn't argue. She just pressed her lips together, the way she did when she was filing something away. Over the years, I watched her do that again and again, mentally bookmarking each slight, each "we're broke," that mysteriously evaporated when it was about Ethan. At the time, I thought she was just protective. I didn't realize she was building a ledger in her mind that would matter later. As we moved deeper into adulthood, marriage, new jobs, moves, I started to pull back from my family in small, clumsy ways. Calls that used to be weekly became bi-weekly, then monthly. I skipped a couple of birthdays, pleading work or distance. I let texts sit unread for longer. My parents noticed, but not in the way you hope parents notice. They didn't say, "We miss you, is everything okay?" Instead, my mother sent messages laced with guilt. "Family is everything. Don't forget who will be there when everyone else leaves. Ethan always makes time for us. It's a shame you're so busy. What happened to the sweet boy who used to love his mother?" If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd escalate to voicemails. Tearful monologues about how she'd sacrificed everything, and how my distance was killing her. When holidays approached, the pressure intensified. "We expect you here for Thanksgiving," she'd say, like it was a summons. "We're still your parents." Sometimes I caved. Sarah and I would drive down, spend a day walking on eggshells, then decompress in the car on the way home, picking apart every little comment, every glance. Other times, we stayed away, and I spent the whole day wrestling with the familiar mix of guilt and relief. Low contact isn't a clean decision. It's more like trying to tune a radio in a storm, turning the dial back and forth, searching for a signal that doesn't make you flinch. One Thanksgiving a few years into our marriage, we ended up at my parents' house again. My mother insisted. "It's important we all be together," she'd said. "Who knows how many more holidays we'll have." We sat around that old dining table, the one that had seen so many uneven meals. Ethan was there with his now-wife, Jenna, showing off baby photos on his phone. My father was quieter than usual, sipping something amber from a glass. My mother floated between us, topping off drinks, directing conversation like a stage manager. At some point, the topic shifted to the future, retirement, health. What happens when we're gone? My mother gave a dramatic little sigh. "When we're gone," she said, looking meaningfully between Ethan and me, "everything we have will be split fairly. That's what good parents do. The word landed in my chest like a stone. Fairly. I felt Sarah's hand tighten around mine under the table. My mother moved on quickly, chattering about wills and not wanting any fighting, as if she hadn't spent decades engineering a system built on imbalance. But that word stuck with me. It echoed on the car ride home, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the spaces between my memories of clearance jackets and gaming consoles, of borrowed savings and surprise trips. Fairly. At the time, I took it as one more empty reassurance, another line in the script she recited when it suited her. I didn't know yet that it was a loose thread, and that if we pulled on it hard enough, the whole fabric of their story about money and about love would start to unravel. It happened on a random Tuesday night, the kind of evening where nothing in particular is supposed to happen. Sarah and I were on the couch, half watching some forgettable show, half scrolling our phones. I remember the glow of the screen on her face, the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background, the feeling of being safe in our little bubble. Then she went very still. "Hey," she said carefully, her voice a little too neutral. "Have you seen Ethan's Instagram lately?" My stomach tightened stupidly before I even knew why. "No," I said. "Why?" She hesitated, then turned her phone toward me. "You might want to look." The photo that filled the screen didn't register all at once. It was a wide shot of a beachfront terrace, all white chairs and flower arrangements, the ocean a perfect, artificial-looking blue behind it. In the center, under an arch dripping with greenery, was Ethan in a tailored suit, holding hands with Jenna in a lace wedding dress. My parents were in the front row, my mother's smile stretched almost to breaking, my father in a suit I'd never seen him bother with for my milestones. The caption read, "Best day of our lives. So grateful to have everyone we love under one roof." I stared at the words, "everyone we love." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Did we know about this?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah's eyes were sad. "Scroll," she said softly. There were more photos. An engagement party weeks earlier, champagne flutes clinking in my parents' backyard, fairy lights strung across the fence. My mother and Ethan arm in arm mid-laugh. A group shot of friends and family, all squeezed together, cheeks pressed. "Celebrating our boy and his future wife," the caption said. Couldn't be happier. Sarah and I weren't in any of them. We hadn't been asked to send a "sorry we can't make it" text or weigh travel costs. We hadn't received a save the date, an invitation, a casual, "Hey, this is happening, but we get it if you can't come." Nothing. A foggy memory surfaced. Months earlier, my mother had mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Ethan and Jenna were probably just going to do something small and local, nothing fancy, money is tight. I'd pictured a courthouse, maybe a backyard barbecue. I'd said we'd do our best to be there. She'd changed the subject. This wasn't small. This was curated, expensive, intentional. I scrolled further. Videos of the reception. Ethan and Jenna's first dance under strings of lights, my parents swaying off to the side, glasses raised. A toast from my father about family, his voice choked with emotion, the caption reading, "So blessed to have such a close-knit clan." Another from my mother, hand over her heart, talking about watching our dreams come true for our children. My thumb hovered over the little heart icon, then moved away. It felt obscene to publicly like something that made me feel like I'd been punched. I set my phone down very carefully on the coffee table, like it might explode. For a long moment, I just sat there, the images replaying in my mind, colliding with every childhood memory of being told budgets were tight, of combined celebrations, of being an afterthought. Maybe they thought we couldn't afford it? I heard myself say, grasping for a story that hurt less. Maybe they assumed we'd say no? Sarah didn't answer right away. She studied my face, then spoke gently. "They didn't even give us the chance," she said. "That's the point. There was a time when I would have defended them reflexively, spun their choices into something understandable, forgivable. Therapy had taught me to pause, though, to notice that impulse and sit with the discomfort instead of smothering it. "I need to call her," I said finally. My hands shook a little as I dialed my mother's number. Sarah reached over and put the call on speaker, resting her hand on my knee. My mother answered on the second ring, voice bright. "Hey, stranger," she said. "To what do I owe this honor?" I swallowed. "Did Ethan get married?" I asked, skipping the small talk. "We saw some pictures." There was the briefest pause, a tiny glitch in the performance, then her tone shifted into airy surprise. "Oh, you saw those?" Yes, he did. It was very last minute. You know how these things go. Last minute, I thought, eyeing the coordinated outfits and professional decorations in the pictures. "We weren't invited," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "There was an engagement party too, right? We didn't know about that either." She laughed, a sharp little sound. "Of course you were invited. You and Sarah were on the list. The invitations must have gotten lost or something. The mail is terrible lately." "All of them?" I asked. "Both times." Another pause. "Well, we also thought you might not want to come," she added quickly. "You're always so busy. And you've been so distant, we didn't want to make you uncomfortable." There it was, the familiar pivot. Somehow, their actions were now about protecting me. My absence from their perfect family photos was my choice, even though I hadn't known there was anything to choose. "I would have come," I said quietly. "He's my brother. I would have tried." My mother sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Honestly, with your attitude lately, I didn't think you'd bother. We were trying to avoid drama. Besides, it was a beautiful day. Only people who really wanted to be there came. That's what matters." Across the couch, I saw Sarah's jaw tighten. "So," my mother continued, voice smoothing out again, "how are you? We haven't heard from you in ages. You know, if you called more, you'd know these things. We can't be the only ones making an effort." There it was again, the quiet accusation, the guilt. She'd orchestrated an entire engagement and wedding without mentioning it to me, then spun it as my failure to stay connected. "I have to go," I said abruptly, feeling my throat close up. "Congrats to Ethan and Jenna." "Tell him yourself," she replied. "If you even have the time." She hung up without waiting for an answer. The silence after the call felt heavier than any argument. Sarah reached over, turned my phone face down, and let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That wasn't an oversight," she said finally. "That was a decision." I stared at the blank TV screen, my reflection faint in the black glass. Hurt and confusion twisted together inside me, along with something older, déjà vu. I thought of birthday parties combined for convenience, of graduations rushed through to make Ethan's practice, of trips I'd heard about only after the fact. This was the same pattern, just scaled up and dressed in wedding attire. "They really think I should be grateful for whatever crumbs they throw my way," I said slowly. "And now the crumbs don't even include being told when my own brother gets married." Sarah nodded. "And they think if they say the right words, you were on the list, lost in the mail, you'll doubt your own eyes instead of their choices." I wanted to argue with her, to find nuance, to soften the edges. But the photos were still sitting there on my phone. My parents beaming under string lights, Ethan cutting the cake, captions about everyone we love under one roof. Everyone. That week, something in me cooled. I stopped answering calls the second they came in, started letting them go to voicemail more often. I muted the family group chat, let holidays slide by with a text instead of a visit. When my mother sent messages about family loyalty and not forgetting where you come from, I didn't rush to prove her wrong by showing up on command. I just didn't. I told myself I was just nursing a wound, licking my emotional scratches in private. It felt like one more thing my family had taken from me, a memory I'd never get, a ritual I'd been cut out of. I grieved that quietly for a while. What I didn't know then, what Sarah was starting to suspect, was that the wedding was just the flashy, public symptom of something deeper and uglier. Exclusion was one thing. Exploitation was another. At that point, I thought I was just mourning being left out of Ethan's big day. I had no idea they were literally taking money too. The money conversation started in the most ordinary way possible, with a spreadsheet open on our laptop and 2 mugs of coffee going cold on the table. Sarah and I had been talking for months about maybe, possibly, starting to look at houses. Nothing fancy, just something with more than one bedroom, maybe a little patch of grass. The kind of place where you could imagine a future expanding instead of constantly bumping into the same walls. We sat side by side, scrolling through our accounts. Student loans, savings, retirement contributions that felt laughably small and yet still like minor miracles. Sarah was in her element, color-coding cells, forecasting best and worst-case scenarios. I was less enthused, but there was a strange comfort in seeing it all laid out, the limits and possibilities of our life in numbers. At one point, she frowned thoughtfully at the screen. "Okay," she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "Remind me again, did your family help with college at all? Like, beyond what you told me about that one late rent transfer?" I shrugged. "They said they had a college fund," I replied. "For both of us. My whole childhood, it was this thing they talked about. We're putting money away for you boys." I assumed some of my tuition came from that. Assumed, she repeated. The word hung between us. Yeah, I said slowly. I never saw any of it directly. They said they were handling the payments. Then there were loans, work-study. It all kind of blurred together. Sarah chewed on her pen cap, thinking. Did anyone else ever mention it? Like your grandparents? The question tugged at an old memory. My grandfather did once, I said. I was maybe 12. We were sitting on his porch, and he said something about being glad he could help with your education and your brothers. He told me, whatever happens, you'll both have opportunities. I could picture his face clearly, the deep lines around his eyes, the way he'd patted my knee. He'd died when I was in high school, a slow decline that ended in a quiet hospital room. After the funeral, there had been some talk about his will, but I'd been kept largely out of it. My parents had emerged solemn and stressed, talking about paperwork and responsibilities. Did he have a lawyer? Sarah asked. Someone who handled his estate? I nodded. Yeah, I think I still have the guy's card somewhere. He sent a condolence note when I graduated college, weirdly. Said my grandfather would have been proud. Sarah's eyes sharpened in that way they did when she felt a puzzle piece click. Can you find it? I went to our bedroom and dug through an old shoebox of random life debris. Ticket stubs, birthday cards, a dried flower from some college event. The card was there, yellowed at the edges but legible. I brought it back to the table, my thumb running over the embossed name. Humor me, she said gently. Call him. Just ask if there was anything set up for you. For both of you. Worst case, we waste 10 minutes. Best case, we get clarity. Part of me balked at the idea. It felt like prying into something I wasn't supposed to question. My parents would freak out if they knew I was doing this, I said. She met my eyes. Your parents don't get to be the only ones who understand your own life, she replied. You're not a kid anymore, asking for permission. So I called. The law office's receptionist put me on hold, then transferred me. After a short wait, an older man's voice came on the line, warm but professional. This is David Kramer, he said. How can I help you? I introduced myself, explaining who my grandfather had been. There was a pause, then he said, Ah, yes. I remember him well. And you actually. You were the younger grandson, right? Younger. Not lesser. The distinction made my chest tighten. I'm sorry to bother you, I said. I just had a question. Growing up, my parents used to talk about a college fund from my grandparents. I never really saw the details. I was wondering if there was anything formal that you handled. A trust or something like that. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint rustle of papers, the clicking of a keyboard. Do you mind if I put you on a brief hold while I pull up the file? He asked. Sure, I said, my mouth suddenly dry. Those few minutes felt like an hour. Sarah watched me across the table, eyes searching my face. I shrugged, not trusting myself to say much. There was a buzzing in my ears that had nothing to do with the phone line. Finally, he came back. Thank you for waiting, Kramer said. I do see something here. Your grandfather established 2 education trusts, one for each of his grandsons. They were set up identically, same initial amounts, same stipulations. Your parents were named as trustees. My hand tightened around the phone. 2 trusts, I repeated. For both of us. Yes, he confirmed. The purpose was very clear, to fund undergraduate education and related expenses. Tuition, books, that sort of thing. Anything beyond that required documentation, but it would still need to be for your benefit. I swallowed. Can you see how those funds were used? Within reason, he said. I can see disbursement records. Let me check. The sound of typing filled my ear again. My heart was doing that slow, heavy pounding it had done at that dinner table the night my mother asked why I was even there. Okay, he said after a minute. It looks like the trust for your brother shows a series of payments directly to his university over 4 years. Standard stuff. Tuition, housing fees. Very straightforward. And mine? I asked. Another pause. Yours is different, he said carefully. There are some payments to your university for the first year. After that, the majority of the withdrawals are listed as reimbursements to the trustees for educational expenses and family support. There's very little documentation attached. No invoices, no receipts. My stomach dropped. Reimbursements to the trustees, I repeated. You mean my parents? That's my understanding, yes, he replied. On paper, they were allowed to be reimbursed for money they had fronted for your education. But the lack of supporting documentation for such large amounts is unusual. How much are we talking about? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. He cleared his throat. I'd prefer to go over exact numbers in writing, but the initial amount in each trust was quite substantial. Enough to cover a 4-year degree at a state university, with some leftover. The balance of your brother's account was used appropriately. Yours appears to have been largely depleted in these reimbursements. I thought about the late-night shifts at the campus cafe, the panic over rent, the loans I'd signed without really understanding how long they'd follow me. The "we're not made of money" texts. The family trips and new gadgets that had shown up during those same years. Just to be clear, I said slowly, there's no record of that money going directly to my tuition after the first year? Or to my housing? Not in the way I'd expect to see, he said. If it did, it was processed through your parents' accounts first, and they didn't submit the proper documentation. From a legal standpoint, as trustees, they had a fiduciary duty to use those funds in your best interest. If funds were instead used for their own expenses, well, that could raise questions about misappropriation. Misappropriation. The word landed like a physical blow that I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Memories started firing in rapid succession. My mother knocking on my door to borrow my paycheck for the electric bill, my father telling me to just take out more loans because that's what they're there for. The vacations they'd somehow afforded while I was eating instant noodles and bargaining with myself about whether I could afford a new pair of shoes. Is there any way to prove what they spent it on? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Without their cooperation and more detailed records, it's difficult, Kramer said. But the burden of accountability is technically on them. If this were challenged, a court could compel them to provide explanations. I'm not giving you legal advice here, just speaking generally. Sarah had grabbed a notebook at some point and was scribbling furiously. Names, dates, phrases. Ask him for copies, she whispered. Would it be possible to get documentation? I asked. Copies of the trust, the disbursement records. For my own files. Of course, he said. Given that you're the beneficiary, you're entitled to that information. If you email my office, we can send you scanned copies within a few days. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I felt like someone had opened a trapdoor under a part of my life I'd thought was solid. All those years I'd told myself we were struggling together, that we were all making sacrifices, that my parents were doing their best with what they had. They hadn't been struggling the way I thought. They'd had a safety net specifically for me and had decided to cut it apart and use the pieces elsewhere. I pushed the phone across the table and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. They took it, I said, my voice cracking. They took what he left for me and treated it like their petty cash. Sarah's face was a mix of fury and something like vindication. I'm so sorry, she said, reaching for my hand. But we needed to know. I thought about my grandfather, about that afternoon on his porch. He hadn't been perfect, no one is. But he'd tried, in his way, to make sure I wasn't left behind. And my parents had intercepted that attempt and rerouted it, like they'd been rerouting everything meant for me my whole life. It wasn't just emotional, I said slowly, the words tasting bitter. They literally stole my future and handed it to my brother. Sarah squeezed my hand. We're not going to confront them yet, she said. Not without everything in writing, not without a plan. They count on you reacting with feelings so they can twist it. This time, we're going to have facts. Over the next days, she followed through. She emailed Kramer, requested every document related to the trusts, asked precise questions. When the PDFs arrived, she printed them and slid them into a binder, tabbed and labeled. Tuition payments, reimbursements, missing receipts, dates that lined up a little too neatly with that European trip, with Ethan's fully funded college experience. Each new piece of paper was another crack in the story my parents had always told. That they were doing their best, that resources were limited, that whatever I got was all there was. We didn't tell them we knew. Not yet. On the surface, life went on: work, bills, small joys. Underneath, something new was forming, a spine made of numbers and signatures, a resolve that wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. Because now, this wasn't just about a forgotten invitation or a lifetime of small, cutting comments. This was about theft in black and white. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. If the call with my grandfather's lawyer had opened a crack, what came next was Sarah quietly prying it wider, inch by inch, with the patience of someone defusing a bomb. Let's start with what we can control, she said that night, pulling our old file box out of the closet. It was full of the paper trail of early adulthood, crumpled financial aid letters, loan documents, printouts of emails from the bursar's office. Stuff I'd shoved into folders and then tried not to think about. We spread everything out on the living room floor. Sarah grabbed a notebook and started making columns: dates, amounts, sources. I watched her work, feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. On one hand, every new piece of information could hurt. On the other, at least it would be the truth, not the vague fog my parents preferred. "Okay," she murmured, tracing a line down a loan summary. "These are the years your grandfather's trust should have been paying most of this." She compared them to the disbursement records Kramer had sent. It didn't take long to see the mismatch. Where the trust should have been covering tuition, there were gaps. In their place were loan numbers with my name on them, interest quietly accumulating in the background of my 20s. "Look at this," she said, sliding a paper toward me. "Here, the financial aid office has you down as getting almost no parental contribution. That increased your loan eligibility. They told the school they could barely help you, while cashing out a fund meant to help you. It was like seeing my life annotated in red ink. We decided to contact the university directly, just to be sure we weren't missing anything. I sent an email to the financial services office, explaining I was reviewing my records and asking if they could confirm any payments made by my parents during my enrollment. A week later, a polite administrator called me back. "I can confirm we received one larger payment from your parents during your first semester," she said. "After that, all tuition and fees appear to have been covered by a combination of loans and your work-study credits. I don't see any significant direct payments from a third party." I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there for a minute, phone in my lap. 1 semester. Out of 8. A fraction of what my grandfather had set aside. Sarah pulled the trust disbursement sheet closer and ran her finger down the list of dates. "Look at this pattern," she said quietly. "Big withdrawals here, here, and here." She circled them. I recognized the timelines without needing to check anything else. The summer Ethan went on that expensive volunteer trip abroad. The year they renovated the kitchen. The months leading up to their European vacation. The same one they'd taken instead of helping with our wedding. My chest felt tight. So while I was eating dollar menu burgers and convincing myself this was just what being a broke student meant, I said slowly, they were using my education fund to redo their countertops. "It looks that way," Sarah replied. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was clenched. The paper records were one thing. The emotional part came when we started going through my phone. "Do you still have old texts from your mom?" she asked. "Some," I said. "A lot, actually. I never delete anything." We sat on the couch, screen brightness turned down, and scrolled back years. The further we went, the younger I looked in my own messages. More apologizing, more explaining, more eager reassurance that, "It's fine, don't worry about it." There they were. "We're barely scraping by, can you send us $500 just this once?" And, "Your father's hours got cut, we're desperate." Each plea was like a little hook into my guilt, and back then, I'd taken the bait almost every time, sending what I could, cutting corners on groceries, picking up extra shifts. Sarah didn't just read the texts. She opened Instagram on her own phone and started cross-referencing dates. "Okay," she said, eyes narrowed. "Here's the text where she says they might not make the mortgage if you can't help." Same week, she posts a photo from that fancy new furniture store, remember? Treating ourselves after a long year. She screenshot both, labeled them with the date, and dropped them into a folder she'd created on our shared drive. Parents' financial pattern. Another. Here, she tells you they're humiliated and on the verge of losing everything, unless you can float them a few hundred. 2 days later, there's a picture of brunch, bottomless mimosas, some kind of tower of pancakes, tagged at the most expensive spot in town. Screenshot. Label. Save. I watched her build a digital dossier of my childhood and early adulthood, each file a small indictment. It was surreal, seeing the gaslighting mapped out so plainly. The private narratives of crisis and sacrifice alongside the public performances of comfort and generosity. Part of me wanted to look away. Another part couldn't. I owed it to the version of myself who'd lain awake at night worrying about whether there'd be enough in my account to cover textbooks. "This one hurts," I said quietly, pointing at a text where my mother had written, "We're doing everything we can to keep you and Ethan afloat, but we're drowning." "Yeah," Sarah replied. "Now open that vacation album," she posted the same week. Smiling faces on a beach. Tropical drinks in their hands. Hashtags about blessed and family first. Each new contrast chipped away at the last shreds of the narrative I'd clung to, that they were flawed but trying, that we were all scraping by together, that my debt and exhaustion were unfortunate necessities, not choices made on my behalf. At one point, I had to put the phone down. "I feel like an idiot," I said, the words thick. "You're not," Sarah answered firmly. "You were a kid and then a young adult, doing what you were trained to do. Take responsibility for everything, assume the best of them, and blame yourself when things felt off. That doesn't make you foolish. It makes them something else." We sat in silence for a while, surrounded by papers and glowing screens. The evidence was everywhere now, in PDFs and text threads, in bank statements and vacation snapshots. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a pattern. Finally, Sarah closed her laptop and looked at me head on. "We can't unknow this," she said. "The question now isn't if we confront them. It's when and how." I nodded slowly. Rage flickered under my skin, but so did caution. I knew my parents' playbook. If I went in hot, they'd call me ungrateful, hysterical, accuse me of making things up. They'd turn it into a loyalty test, a drama I'd be cast as the villain in. "We need the right setting," I said. "Somewhere they can't just hang up or walk away. Somewhere Ethan and Jenna are there too. Everyone who's been part of this needs to hear it." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "We're not ambushing them in a phone call. We're going to pick a moment where they feel confident, in control. That's when they'll underestimate you." We started to put the papers back into folders, the screens back to sleep. On the surface, nothing had changed. Our apartment was still the same. Our bank account hadn't magically grown. But under the neat stacks and closed tabs, something fundamental had shifted. The story of my life, the one my parents had been authoring for me, now had footnotes, corrections, receipts. We didn't have to wait long for the right setting to present itself. About a week later, my phone buzzed with a new group text from my parents. "Family dinner next Sunday," it read. "Very important. We'd like everyone there." I stared at the message, then at Sarah. She raised an eyebrow, a slow, knowing expression. "Like clockwork," she said. The group text landed on a Thursday afternoon, while I was answering emails at my desk. It was from my mother, unusually formal, addressed to me, Sarah, Ethan, and Jenna all at once. "Family dinner next Sunday, very important. We'd like everyone there. We have some news to share." No emojis, no love you, no specifics. Just that. My first instinct was to type, "Can't make it," and toss my phone into a drawer. After everything we'd uncovered, the idea of voluntarily walking back into their house felt like pressing on a bruise. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, feeling that old push-pull of obligation and self-preservation. Sarah read the message over my shoulder when I got home. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Let's go." I turned to her, surprised. "Seriously?" She nodded. "They just handed us exactly what we were waiting for, a setting where everyone will be in one place, where they'll feel comfortable and in control. I think this is the place." There was a steadiness in her voice that calmed the part of me that wanted to run. We'd spent weeks gathering facts, building a case. It made a twisted kind of sense to present it on their turf, in front of the audience they'd trained to see me as the problem. "Okay," I said slowly. "But you lead. If I start this, I know how it'll go. I'll get defensive, they'll push every button they installed. I'll end up apologizing for existing before we finish the salad." She gave a small, wry smile. "You're not wrong," she said. "I'll speak when it's time. Until then, we observe. And when we do say something, it'll be facts only. No yelling matches, no side arguments. They don't get to drag you back into that chaos." In the days before the dinner, she got organized. She loaded all the trust documents onto her tablet, bookmarked the key pages, and created a simple outline of the main points. The original amounts, the disbursements to Ethan's school, the reimbursements to my parents, the missing receipts. She printed hard copies of the most damning records, just in case someone had trouble with technology when it mattered. Watching her stack the pages, slide them into a folder, I felt more like a client than a husband. But there was comfort in that, too. She was building a buffer between me and the storm I knew was coming. Sunday arrived whether I was ready or not. On the drive over, my stomach twisted itself into knots. The route was painfully familiar. The same freeway exits, the same billboards, the same gas station where my father used to stop for coffee on our way to Ethan's games. "On a scale of 1 to 10, Sarah asked gently, "how much do you want to turn the car around right now?" 11, I said honestly. "Maybe 12. She reached over and rested her hand on the back of my neck, thumb brushing the hairline. "You're not the same kid who used to come home and take whatever they dished out," she said. "You have information now. You have context. And you're not walking in there alone." The old pattern still tugged at me, though. As we turned onto my parents' street, my chest tightened the way it always had when we got close to that house, like my body remembered before my mind could catch up. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head, already scolding, already spinning. We parked across the street. For a second, I just sat there, looking at the facade I knew so well. The chipped paint on the railing, the overpruned bushes, the porch light that flickered sometimes. It looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown. "One more thing," I said before we got out. "If they start attacking you, I know," she interrupted softly. "You'll want to jump in front of me. But remember, they don't actually know how to handle someone who doesn't play by their emotional rules. That's our advantage. Let me be the one who stays calm when they try to drag you back into the script." We crossed the street together. Inside, the house smelled like it always did on special occasions. Some combination of roasting meat, store-bought rolls, and my mother's perfume. Voices drifted from the dining room, laughter too loud, the clink of ice in glasses. Ethan and Jenna were already there, standing near the table with drinks in hand. My parents hovered nearby, all smiles and exaggerated warmth, directed almost entirely at them. "Look who finally decided to show up," my mother said when she saw us, her tone light but edged. She gave me a brief, perfunctory hug, then pulled back to kiss Sarah's cheek like we were all actors hitting our marks. "You look tired," she added to me. "Working too hard." "Hi, Mom," I said, ignoring the jab. "Thanks for having us." My father shook my hand in that awkward, too firm way, then clapped Ethan on the shoulder with genuine affection. My brother smirked at me over his glass, the same half-amused, half-pitying look he'd perfected as teenagers. "Hey man," he said. "Glad you could make it." The tension in the room was thick, even under the layer of forced cheer. My parents were almost saccharine with Ethan and Jenna, fussing over their drinks, asking about their plans, laughing too loudly at mediocre jokes. With us, everything was clipped, efficient, pleasantries checked off a list. As we took our seats, my mother kept alluding to the big news. "We're really excited to tell you about something," she said, eyes shining. "It's going to affect the whole family's future." "You'll see," my father added, in the tone of someone who's rehearsed a reveal and can't wait to watch the reactions. Sarah and I exchanged a quick glance. Under the table, she slid her foot against mine, a silent reminder that we knew more about our family's future than they realized. We made it through the first course on autopilot, answering surface-level questions about work and the weather. I noticed every micro-interaction. The way my mother served Ethan first, then Jenna, then my father, leaving me and Sarah for last. The way she corrected me on how I held my fork, but called Ethan's messy plate charming. The way my father's eyes slid away whenever conversation edged toward anything that might be remotely uncomfortable. It was like watching the old play in high definition, every cue suddenly visible. Eventually, my mother stood, wineglass in hand, and cleared her throat. The room quieted. Ethan leaned back in his chair, expectant. Jenna smiled politely. My father straightened a little, ready to play his part. I looked at my mother's face, the practiced smile, the bright eyes, and saw something beneath it I hadn't always recognized for what it was. Not simple pride or even petty satisfaction, but a kind of cruelty. The pleasure of having power over the story, over who was in and who was out. She lifted her glass, the light catching the red wine like a stain. "We have some news to share," she said, voice ringing slightly in the too bright dining room. I didn't know exactly what was coming next. I didn't need to. I knew enough that whatever they were about to announce would be framed as generosity, as wisdom, as parental sacrifice. I also knew it would probably come at my expense. By dessert, I'd understand what this dinner was really about, and so would they. My mother held her glass like it was a microphone, soaking in the attention. "So," she began, smiling toward Ethan and Jenna, "your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. Our future, of course, but also yours. We won't be around forever, and we want to make sure what we have goes to the child who's really building something." She paused, letting that settle, then continued, eyes shining. "We've decided to advance Ethan a portion of his inheritance now, to help them buy a bigger house. For all the future grandkids. It just makes sense to invest where it will really matter." Jenna's eyes widened. Ethan looked stunned, then smug. My father nodded, adding, "Property is a smart move. We'd rather see our hard work benefit them while we're alive. My fork felt heavy in my hand. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. My mother turned to me, her tone softening into something that almost sounded regretful. Now, obviously, that means we won't be able to offer the same support to you, she said. Given your situation and the choices you've made, it wouldn't be responsible. You've distanced yourself. You're not as stable as your brother. We have to be realistic. There it was, the trapdoor opening beneath my chair. The old script slid into place, smooth from years of use. If I protested, I'd be ungrateful. If I stayed quiet, I'd be proving their point. Shame rose up in me, hot and familiar, even with the trust documents burned into my brain. Old reflexes don't disappear just because you've seen the receipts. For a moment, I saw myself the way they wanted me to. The difficult one, the disappointment, the son who hadn't earned what his brother had. I stared at the tablecloth, at a tiny stain near my plate, and forced myself to breathe. In. Out. This wasn't about who deserved what. This was about a pattern so old it felt like gravity. I thought you said things would be split fairly. I heard myself say, my voice low but steady. My mother laughed. Not a big belly laugh, just a sharp, derisive little sound. Oh, please, she said. Why are you even here? You've made it clear this family isn't your priority. The words hit the air like a slap. Time seemed to slow. My father's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Ethan's smirk faltered, curiosity flickering behind his eyes. Jenna glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable but saying nothing. That question, why are you even here, wasn't new. I'd heard versions of it my whole life, in different tones, with different pretexts. But something about her saying it now, after everything we knew, after all the secrets about family money she'd been sitting on, crystallized the truth. They had never expected me to be there, not really. I was an extra they tolerated when it suited them, a background character whose main function was to throw Ethan's spotlight into sharper relief. Everyone at the table turned to look at me then, waiting. It was like watching a movie I'd seen 1,000 times. This was the part where I shrank, where I apologized for being hurt, where I tried to justify my existence to the people who'd benefited from questioning it. But this time, something in me stayed very still. My heart was pounding so hard it made my hands tremble under the table, but I didn't reach for an explanation. I didn't rush to defend myself or remind them of the calls I had made, the visits I had shown up for, the money I'd sent home when they asked. I just looked at her. I watched her face, the satisfaction in her eyes at landing the line, the expectation of the familiar collapse. She thought she'd nailed the scene. That this dinner would end like all the others, with me off balance, her firmly in control. Instead, I placed my fork down carefully, aligning it with the edge of my plate like I had all the time in the world. The room felt oddly quiet, the clink of distant dishes from the kitchen suddenly far away. I could sense Ethan watching me, tense, maybe wondering if this was finally the moment I'd snap. But I stayed silent. Next to me, I felt Sarah shift. The fabric of her dress brushed my arm. Without a word, she reached up, folded her napkin with precise, unhurried movements, and set it on the table. Then she pushed her chair back and stood up. The scrape of wood against wood cut through the silence. My mother's eyes snapped to her, annoyance flickering across her face. How dare someone else interrupt the performance? My father looked startled. Jenna's mouth parted slightly. For once in my life, I didn't rush to defend myself. I let someone else see me and speak. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her hands on the table or throw her napkin dramatically. She just stood there, spine straight, eyes clear, and said, "Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Collins. The timing is actually perfect, because we have some family business to go over too." My mother blinked, thrown for a second by the formality of Mrs. Collins. She preferred Mom from everyone, including people she'd known 10 minutes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, the edges of her smile stiffening. Sarah reached down and lifted her tote bag from the floor. From it, she pulled out her tablet and a thin folder of neatly stacked papers. She laid them on the table like she was setting out placemats. "We've been doing some financial housekeeping," she said calmly. "Going over student loans, savings, talking about buying a house. In the process, we learned some things about the education trusts your father set up for his grandsons." The word trusts landed like a dropped glass. My father's expression flickered, just for a second, before he schooled it back to neutral. My mother's eyes narrowed. Ethan looked confused. "What trusts?" my mother said too quickly. "I don't know what you mean." Sarah tapped her tablet, pulling up the scanned documents. The two education trusts, she clarified. Equal amounts, one for Ethan, one for Daniel. Your father's lawyer was very helpful. As the beneficiary, Daniel was entitled to see the records. So we did. She turned the screen so it faced my parents, zooming in on the first page. There, in black and white, was my grandfather's name, the amounts, and the designation. For the post-secondary education of my grandsons, Ethan Collins and Daniel Collins, in equal measure. My mother didn't lean in to look. She crossed her arms instead. I don't appreciate your tone, she said. We did what we could. College is expensive. You have no idea what we sacrificed. Sarah didn't flinch. I agree, she said evenly. College is expensive. Which is why it's interesting that Ethan's trust shows payments directly to his university, tuition, housing, fees, while Daniel's shows a very different pattern. She slid one of the printed sheets across the table. Ethan's name, school, and a clear sequence of payments were listed in tidy rows. Here, she continued, pointing. This is how it's supposed to look. Money from the trust goes to the school. Straightforward. No one's accusing you of mishandling Ethan's fund. My brother swallowed, his eyes scanning the page. I didn't know Grandpa did all this, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. My father shifted in his chair. We handled everything fairly, he said. If there were any differences, it was because of circumstances. You don't understand the pressure we were under. We're getting to that, Sarah said, her tone still maddeningly calm. She picked up another page and set it down. This is Daniel's fund. Notice the first semester, one direct payment to his university. After that, almost everything is listed as reimbursement to trustees for educational expenses and family support. My mother glanced down at the paper, then away. We had emergencies, she snapped. We fronted money for him all the time. We always intended to pay it back. Sarah's gaze didn't waver. Emergencies, she repeated. Okay, then help me understand why those emergencies line up almost exactly with the deposit dates on your European trip photos, the kitchen renovation, and Ethan's overseas program. She opened her photo gallery, swiping to folders she'd prepared. On one side of the screen, trust withdrawal dates. On the other, my mother's social media posts. Here, she said, tapping. Trust withdrawal, June 5th. Caption from June 7th. Finally redoing this old kitchen. We earned this. Another withdrawal in August. 2 weeks later. Our boy off to Europe for the experience of a lifetime. For a second, the room was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the light. Ethan's jaw tightened. Jenna turned to him, whispering, Did you know about this? He shook his head slowly, eyes still on the documents. No, he said, his voice flat. I knew Grandpa set something up, but I thought it was the same for both of us. My mother bristled. We did what we had to do, she said. We were drowning. Your father's hours were cut. The house needed repairs. Daniel never went without. He had food, a roof over his head. We didn't owe him a luxury education. I felt the old guilt twitch in my chest, the part of me trained to accept crumbs as feasts. Before it could take over, Sarah cut in, her voice sharper now. Love isn't stealing from one child to finance the other's fantasies, she said. This wasn't about survival. This was about choices. You had money earmarked for Daniel's education, and instead of using it to reduce his loans, you rerouted it into vacations, renovations, and opportunities that only benefited Ethan. My mother's cheeks flushed. How dare you come into my home and talk to me like this, she hissed. After everything we've done for him, you two are ungrateful. You have no idea what it costs to raise children. Gratitude is for gifts, Sarah replied. What you took weren't gifts. They were his. The sentence hung in the air like a verdict. My father tried a different tack. We always planned to even things out later, he said. With the will. With the house. You're blowing this out of proportion. Families help each other. Sometimes lines blur. I found my voice then, quieter than Sarah's but no less firm. Every time you looked away, I said to him, you signed off on this. He flinched just slightly. His eyes flicked to my mother, then back to his plate. The old alliance, right there in that tiny movement. My mother jabbed a finger at me. Listen to how he talks to us, she said to the table at large, appealing to Ethan and Jenna. We put a roof over his head, fed him, clothed him, and this is the thanks we get. Dragging us like criminals over a few accounting choices. A few accounting choices wouldn't have left me with tens of thousands in loans while my designated college fund disappeared into granite countertops and plane tickets, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You didn't just put a roof over my head. You built it using money that was supposed to be my foundation. My mother rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You're being dramatic. You've always been like this. If you hadn't pulled away, we would've. Stopped what? I interrupted. Stopped hiding the fact that you drained my trust? Stopped pretending we were all scraping by together while you used my safety net to keep Ethan comfortable. She opened her mouth, then closed it, fury sparking in her eyes. That's what this dinner is about, isn't it? I added, the pieces clicking in place. You give Ethan his advance on the future, dress it up as wisdom and love, and hope I stay quiet so you never have to answer for what you already took from me. My mother scoffed. We don't owe you an explanation for how we managed our money, she said. This is why we didn't tell you about the wedding. You always make everything about you. Funny, I said, a tired, bitter calm settling over me. My whole life has been about you. Your needs, your emergencies, your image. I didn't lose my family. I stopped pretending I had one. Silence fell. Ethan stared at me like he'd never really seen me before. Jenna looked ill. My father's shoulders sagged, years of cowardice suddenly visible. My mother grasped at one last thread. You wouldn't even be standing where you are without us, she said. We did our best. If you take this to outsiders, you'll destroy this family. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who could spin theft into sacrifice, exclusion into protection, cruelty into concern. This family, I said quietly, was built on a lie. I'm not the one who broke it. Beside me, Sarah rested her fingertips on her tablet. Also, she said, her tone reverting to businesslike, just so we're clear, there may be legal consequences. Your father's lawyer mentioned misappropriation, breach of fiduciary duty. We're not making idle threats. We're gathering options. My mother laughed, but it was shaky now. You wouldn't dare, she said. You'd drag your own parents into court? For what? After everything we gave up for you. Again, Sarah said, what you gave up was never yours to give. And yes, if it comes to it, we'll involve whoever we need to. We're done shouldering the cost of your choices alone. My father opened his mouth, then stopped. His gaze slid to the folder, to the dates and numbers staring back at him. For once, he had no ready deflection. And one more thing, I added, a final thread snapping inside me. You should know this conversation isn't just happening in this room. My mother's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Sarah pressed a small icon on her tablet. A soft beep sounded. We started recording when you made your family announcement, she said. For our own records. You've been very clear about your decisions tonight. If your story suddenly changes later, we'll have something to refer back to. For a heartbeat, no one moved. My parents' expressions froze, the facade cracking around the edges. I watched as the realization dawned. The usual deniability, the ability to rewrite what had been said, had just slipped out of their hands. You recorded us? My mother whispered, scandalized. In our own home? Sarah met her outrage with something cooler. We documented you, she said. After years of listening to one version of events, we decided it was time to keep a copy for ourselves. The room felt different after that. Smaller somehow. The old power dynamic, me on the defensive, them in control, had shifted. They weren't used to having their actions reflected back at them in anything other than the mirror they polished themselves. For the first time I could remember, my parents were silent. Not triumphantly, not smugly, just stunned. And in that brief, fragile quiet, I realized we were past the point of no return. Whatever happened next, however they tried to spin this later, there was a record now of their words, their choices, their priorities. The script they'd been directing my whole life had been interrupted. And we were finally holding the pen. The silence shattered all at once. My mother shot to her feet, so quickly her chair scraped backward. This is unbelievable, she snapped, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. You've been poisoning him against us for years, haven't you? Turning him against his own blood. Recording us in our own home? What kind of person does that? Sarah didn't flinch. The kind of person who's tired of watching him be lied to, she said evenly. And again, the recording started when you announced a major financial decision that directly affects both of your sons. That's not gossip. That's documentation. My father found his voice next, sputtering. Family business doesn't belong in lawyers' offices, he said. You don't drag your parents in front of strangers. You solve things in-house. That's how decent people handle their problems. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, focusing on my breathing the way Dr. Patel had taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to, she'd said once. I repeated that to myself now like a mantra. We tried to solve things in-house for decades, I said quietly. All that got me was debt and confusion. Ethan suddenly pushed his chair back, eyes wide. Wait, he said, looking between our parents and the documents. I need to know something. Did my tuition and that down payment you helped with, did any of that come from his fund? My mother recoiled as if he'd slapped her. How can you even ask that? She demanded. We did everything for you. For both of you. This is how you repay us. It's a yes or no question, Ethan said, voice shaking. Did you use his trust for me? My father shifted, jaw working. The trusts were for the family, he said finally. We had to make choices. You were on a path. Your brother. Daniel, I corrected softly. Daniel was always unpredictable, he finished weakly. Sarah slid another page toward Ethan. The records show your payments going where they were supposed to, she said. But the timing of the withdrawals from his fund lines up with a lot of what you benefited from. Whether you knew it or not, you were funded partly by money meant for him. Jenna let out a low, disbelieving exhale. Oh my God, she whispered to Ethan. This is messed up. My mother rounded on Sarah again. You don't belong in this conversation, she hissed. You married into this family, you didn't build it. You don't get to dissect every decision we made. I didn't pull the numbers out of thin air, Sarah replied. This document shows where the money went. This email shows you telling him you were broke the same week you posted about a new patio set. These text messages show him sending you money while you were draining his trust. If the story is different, show us evidence. Otherwise, this is what we have. Every time my parents tried to pivot to vague sacrifices, to you don't understand what it's like, Sarah calmly dropped another fact in front of them. It was like watching someone try to wriggle out of a net that only tightened with each movement. My father tried indignation. We gave you everything we could, he said. A roof, food, opportunities. Do you know how many kids would kill for what you had? I know a lot of kids whose parents didn't steal the college fund their grandfather left them, I answered. My voice was steady, to my own surprise. I worked 2 jobs while you took vacations on money that had my name on it. You're twisting things, my mother insisted, eyes shining with angry tears. We always meant to make it right. The will, the house, the advances. Right for who? Ethan cut in. Because it sounds like you made it right for me. Not for him. Her head snapped toward him, betrayal etched on her face. Don't talk to me like that, she said. After everything we poured into you. We thought you, of all people, would understand. We invested in the child who was going to actually make us proud. The words were out before she seemed to realize what she'd said. The room went dead still. There it was. Naked, unvarnished. Not couched in different personalities, or he just needs more guidance. Not softened with we love you both, but just the blunt hierarchy that had governed our lives. One child worth investing in, one child not. Something inside me went very quiet. I saw flashes, rapid fire. The trophies in the hallway, the shared birthday cakes, the clearance jacket, the forgotten invitations, the borrowed paychecks. All of it lined up behind that sentence like soldiers taking their places. Ethan's face drained of color. So that's it, he asked hoarsely. You invested in me and what? Wrote him off. We never wrote him off, my father protested weakly. He made it hard. Always questioning, always pushing back. You were easier to help. Jenna stared at them, disgust creeping into her features. Do you hear yourselves? She asked. You're talking about your sons like they're stocks. My mother's mask slipped completely then. The charm, the self-pity, the practiced tears, all of it burned off, leaving something harder. You have no idea what it was like raising him, she spat, jabbing a finger in my direction. Always sensitive, always making us the bad guys. We did what we had to do. We weren't going to let one difficult child drag the whole family down. The words should have gutted me. For a long time, they would have. Instead, I felt an odd, cold clarity. They were finally saying out loud what I'd felt under my skin my whole life. Across the table, Ethan looked like someone had just pulled a rug out from under his entire worldview. You used his money, he said slowly, like he was tasting the idea. You used his money to give me the life you wanted me to have. And then you told him to be grateful. My mother opened her mouth, closed it, then turned back to me, desperate for a familiar script. Don't let her do this to us, she pleaded, nodding at Sarah. She's turned you against your own parents. We're human. We made compromises. But we love you. That has to count for something. I thought of my grandfather's porch, of Sarah's color-coded notes, of every time I'd swallowed hurt to keep the peace. Love that requires you to betray yourself to earn it isn't love. It's a contract you never agreed to. For the first time, I said quietly, we're all hearing the same story. Not your version, not the edited highlights. The truth. You chose a favorite. You funded your image of success with money that wasn't yours. And when I struggled, you told me it was because I didn't try hard enough. My father rubbed his temples. We can talk about this calmly, he said. We don't need to drag the past through the mud. Sarah shook her head. The past is already muddy, she said. We're just shining a light on who tracked it through the house. No one laughed. My parents' faces were stiff, brittle. The narrative they'd curated for decades was cracking in their hands, and they didn't know how to hold anything else. I looked at Ethan, really looked at him. The golden child, seeing the machinery behind his pedestal for the first time. He met my eyes, shame and anger and something like sorrow all tangled together. In that moment, it hit me. I had spent years chasing a kind of approval that was always contingent on me staying small, needy, wrong. I'd tried to solve a rigged equation, believing if I just adjusted myself enough, the outcome would change. But the variable had never been me. It had always been them. In that moment, I understood that chasing their approval had always been a losing game. I could finally stop playing. I stood up slowly, the way you might rise after sitting too long, deliberate, feeling every inch of movement. My legs were unsteady, but my voice, when it came, felt like it belonged to someone who had finally decided to stop whispering. Here's what's going to happen now, I said. My parents looked at me like they barely recognized me. For years, they'd been used to a version of me that folded at the first sign of conflict. This one stayed standing. We're going to consult with Granddad's attorney, I continued. We'll be asking for a full accounting of both trusts and looking into options to recover what was misused. That may include civil action. I'm not saying that to threaten you. I'm saying it so there are no misunderstandings later. My father's face flushed. You'd really drag us through court? He demanded. Your own parents? Over money? Do you hear yourself? I hear myself clearly, I said. For the first time, actually. I glanced at Sarah. She gave the smallest nod. From this point forward, I added, you are not to contact me directly about any of this. No late-night calls, no guilt texts, no voicemails about how I'm killing you. If you have something to say about money, you can say it to our lawyer. We'll give you the information. My mother stared at me, eyes wide, mascara beginning to smudge. You can't be serious, she breathed. You can't just cut us off. We're your family. We're all you have. I shook my head. You're not my safety net, I said quietly. You're the hole I spent my life climbing out of. The words surprised even me, but once they were out, I didn't want to take them back. They were truer than almost anything I'd ever said to them. I turned to Ethan. He looked wrecked, like someone had pulled the foundation out from under his carefully built life. As for you, I said, I don't expect you to fix what they did. But I can't pretend nothing's changed either. Whether we have a relationship after this, that's up to the choices you make now. You can't stay neutral. You either stand with the truth, or you go back to what's comfortable. His mouth opened, then closed. I need time, he stammered. I didn't know, Dan. I swear I didn't know. I believe you didn't know the details, I replied. But you knew something was off. We both did. You just had more to lose by asking questions. My mother made a strangled sound, tears spilling over. He's your brother, she cried. We gave you each other. You're supposed to look out for one another, not tear everything apart. You tore it apart, I said, still calm. When you decided one child was an investment and the other was expendable. She shifted into full-on sobbing then, the kind that had always worked on me before. I did my best, she wailed. Do you have any idea how hard it was? I was alone in this. Your father was never around, your brother was a challenge, and now you're punishing me for not being perfect. In the past, this was where I would have rushed in. I would have told her she was a good mom, that we all make mistakes, that I knew she loved me. I would have absorbed her guilt and called it reconciliation. This time, I let the silence stand between us. My father oscillated between anger and appeal. Think about what you're doing, he said. Lawyers, recordings, threats, you're making a spectacle out of private matters. We can work this out. We can give you a little more, adjust some things in the will, make sure. This isn't a negotiation, I interrupted. This is a boundary. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair, feeling the weight of my keys in the pocket, like a reminder that I had somewhere else to go now. Sarah gathered the folder in her tablet, her movements efficient, No wasted motion. It struck me how many times I'd walked out of this house feeling smaller. Today, with each item we picked up, I felt less tethered. "You're making a mistake," my mother said desperately. "You'll regret this when we're gone. When you realize you burned your bridges for nothing." I looked at her, really looked. The woman who had shaped so much of my internal landscape, now scrambling to keep control of a story that had finally slipped away. "You keep saying I'm destroying the family," I said softly. "You did that when you decided one child was disposable." Her mouth snapped shut. For a second, she just stared at me, eyes full of a hurt that might have moved me once. Now it just looked like consequence. We walked toward the front door. Ethan called my name, voice breaking. I paused long enough to glance back. "I'm not asking you to choose me over them," I said. "I'm asking you to choose what's true over what's easy. If you ever decide to do that, you know how to reach me." Then I stepped outside. The air was cool, sharper than inside. It hit my lungs like I'd emerged from underwater. Sarah closed the door gently behind us. The latch clicked, a small sound that felt huge. We walked down the front path together, the porch light throwing our shadows long across the cracked driveway. I didn't look back. I'd spent enough of my life looking over my shoulder, hoping they'd be different the next time. Leaving their house for the last time felt less like an ending, and more like surfacing. The weeks after that dinner felt strangely quiet, even with everything in motion. Sarah and I met with my grandfather's attorney in his small, book-lined office, the air smelling faintly of old paper and coffee. He listened as we laid out what we'd found, flipping through our labeled binder with a frown that deepened at each tab. "You've done your homework," he said finally. "The paper trail is compelling. As trustees, your parents had a clear duty to you. On its face, this looks like a serious breach." He didn't promise miracles. Lawyers rarely do. But he was cautiously optimistic about negotiating some kind of repayment or settlement. "Most people in your parents' position don't want this aired in court," he said. "My job is to make it clear that's the alternative if they refuse to engage." We signed documents, authorized formal requests for a full accounting, and walked out feeling like we'd handed the weight of proof to someone whose hands were built for carrying it. A few days later, Ethan texted. Just 3 words at first. "Can we talk?" We met at a coffee shop halfway between our places. He looked tired, older somehow, the easy confidence I'd always associated with him replaced by something quieter. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as we sat down. No preamble. For all of it. For not seeing or pretending not to. For benefiting from something that should have been yours too. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream. "I don't think you knew the details," I said. "But yeah, you knew something was off." He nodded, eyes dropping. "I did," he admitted. Every time I started to question it, Mom would say I was ungrateful, or that you were being dramatic, or that I was ruining a good thing. And I let that be enough. Because it was easier. He told me he and Jenna had fought after the dinner. She'd pushed him hard, asked what kind of man he wanted to be, what kind of father, someday, if this was his example. "I want to help," he said. "If you need me to confirm dates, payments, conversations, I will. Even if it makes me look bad. I don't want to keep standing on something that was built on your back." I didn't rush to absolve him. Forgiveness, I was learning, isn't something you hand out like party favors. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I also need you to understand that this isn't just about money for me. It's about a lifetime of being told my experience wasn't real." He nodded. "I get that more now," he said. "I'm trying to see them clearly too." We agreed to stay in touch cautiously. I left the cafe feeling something complicated. Not exactly hope, but the sense that maybe we weren't doomed to reenact the same roles forever. My parents, meanwhile, reacted exactly how I'd expected, and exactly how I'd prepared for. Their first email came 2 days after they received the lawyer's letter. It was furious. All caps accusations of betrayal, threats to cut me out of the will, as if that would scare me back into line. The next was tearful, full of phrases like, "We did our best," and "You're killing your mother." Voicemails alternated between rage and martyrdom. "How could you do this to us?" One day. "We always loved you more than you'll ever know the next." I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I forwarded each message to our attorney and then archived it. No more long explanations, no late-night apologies, no carefully crafted replies designed to keep the peace. Their words, for the first time, were evidence, not instructions. At night, when the old anxiety tried to creep back in, I'd pull out the binder or reread the lawyer's updates. There were still uncertainties, still no guarantees. But there were also facts, dates, amounts, signatures that didn't change no matter how many times my parents insisted we were rewriting history. For the first time, their words didn't dictate my reality. Facts did. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after all of that. There was no swelling soundtrack, no neatly wrapped ending. What I got instead was something quieter, and in a way better, a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. Sarah and I slipped into a new rhythm. Without the constant background noise of my parents' demands and guilt trips, our days felt less jagged. Holidays shifted fully to her side of the family, and then beyond that, into something we built ourselves. Thanksgiving at her parents' became a given, laughter in the kitchen, people apologizing when they snapped, arguments that ended in actual resolutions instead of silent resentments. On top of that, we started our own tradition: misfit dinners. It began with one friend who hated going home for Christmas because their mother weaponized every gift. Then another whose dad only called when he needed money. Before long, our small apartment was full a few times a year, friends in mismatched chairs, balancing plates on their knees, trading stories that were sometimes painful, sometimes hilarious in their absurdity. We lit candles, cooked too much food, and made a simple rule: you didn't have to earn your place at the table. Showing up as you were was enough. Meanwhile, the legal case moved slowly but steadily. After some initial bluster, my parents' lawyer clearly advised them that courts tend to frown on trustees using education funds as a personal slush pile. They eventually agreed to a settlement, a structured repayment of a portion of the misused trust, spread over several years, in exchange for us not filing a public lawsuit. It wasn't everything they'd taken. It didn't erase the extra shifts I'd worked or the interest I'd paid. But it was something concrete, something that said, what happened to you wasn't just unfortunate. It was wrong. Tangible accountability, even if partial. More important than the money, though, was what I let go of in the process. Somewhere between signing the settlement papers and watching the first repayment land in an account with my name on it, I stopped waiting for them to transform into the parents I'd always needed. I stopped imagining a future where they'd finally see me clearly, apologize without qualifications, and make it all make sense. They were who they were. I couldn't rewrite them. I could only stop letting their version of love define my worth. When enough of the repaid money had accumulated, Sarah and I did something that felt almost surreal. We bought a house. Not a sprawling dream home, just a modest place on a quiet street, a small yard, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, and sunlight that pooled in the living room every afternoon. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were using part of what my grandfather had intended for my start in life to finally put down real roots. It felt, in a way, like honoring what he'd tried to do, even if it came years later and by a much more painful route. I found myself savoring the smallest things. Hanging our own photos on the walls, picture after picture where I wasn't in the corner, half-cropped, but right in the middle, laughing with people who actually liked me. Standing in the paint aisle with Sarah, arguing good-naturedly about shades of blue. Assembling cheap bookshelves in what would eventually be a guest room, sweating and swearing, and then stepping back to look at them like we'd built a skyscraper. One afternoon, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, just looking. Clothes piled on a chair, a book open on the nightstand, Sarah's hair tie abandoned on the floor. Ordinary mess. Ordinary life. And this thought came to me, simple and startling. No one else gets to decide if I belong here. In my parents' house, belonging had always felt conditional, dependent on how small I made myself, how useful I was in propping up their story. In this house, belonging was built into the lease, the mortgage, the daily choosing of each other. The love here wasn't perfect. We still argued about dishes and schedules and money. But it was warm, not cold. It was consistent, not something I had to chase. It was conditional only on honesty and respect, not on my willingness to disappear. Every time I walked up our front steps, key in hand, I felt that contrast. I knew viscerally that I had finally stepped out of a house that had never truly been mine and into a home I'd chosen and built and earned. If you've made it this far, maybe it's because something in my story sounds uncomfortably familiar. Maybe you've been the one who never quite fit at your own family table, the one who got the leftovers while someone else was called the pride and joy. If that's you, I want to say this as clearly as I can. There was never anything wrong with you for noticing the difference. What I've learned slowly and the hard way is that family is not an automatic right granted by DNA. It's an ongoing choice to show up with respect and honesty, over and over again. Blood may explain where you came from. It doesn't decide where you're allowed to go. Going no contact or low contact or anything in between isn't a movie moment. It's grief and second-guessing and quiet holidays where you feel the outline of what could have been. I won't pretend otherwise. There are days it still hits me that my parents will probably never know certain versions of my life, and that my future kids, if we have them, may never meet their biological grandparents. But there's also relief that settles in once the noise dies down. There's the peace of waking up and realizing your phone isn't a threat. There's the slow, steady rebuilding of a sense of self that isn't constantly cross-examined. The biggest shift for me was understanding that setting boundaries doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you honest. It doesn't erase whatever good moments existed. It just refuses to let those moments be used as a discount code to excuse everything else. I wouldn't have gotten here alone. Sarah, her family, our friends, they all showed me what love without strings actually looks like. People who apologize when they're wrong. Who don't keep a silent scoreboard of what they've done for you. Who don't ask you to bleed so they can feel generous. If you're watching this and you've been the scapegoat, or you've been conveniently left off invitations, or you've discovered that family money somehow never quite reached you, I'd like to hear your story, if you feel safe sharing it. Drop it in the comments, even if it's just a piece of it. You never know who might read it and realize they're not crazy, and they're not alone. And if you want more stories like this, ones that might hurt a little at first listen, but hopefully help you feel less alone and more certain of what you deserve, feel free to subscribe and stick around. This corner of the internet is for people who've been told for years to be grateful for crumbs, and are just now realizing they're allowed to want a full meal. Choosing yourself over a system that harms you isn't selfish. It's survival, and you are allowed to survive.